Okay, well, hello, my name is Matthew Stewart. I'm a policy officer for the East of England Local Government Association. And with me today is Roy Almer, the Director of Policy for the East of England Local Government Association. Stephen Evans, the Chief Executive of Norwich City Council, and Richard Carr, the outgoing Chief Executive of Central Bedfordshire and the previously the lead Chief Executive for the Eastern Region. Thank you for both of you for joining us today. Stephen, I was wondering if it would be all right if you could tell us a bit about yourself and introduce yourself for anyone who's watching.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I'm Stephen Evans, as you say, Chief Executive of the City Council, Norwich City Council. I've been here since the end of January 2020, so coming on for kind of 10 months now. And before that, I was in London for 20 years or so. I was a civil servant for the first 10 years of that at the Treasury in Whitehall, and then made the switch to local government in 2011, and I spent 6 years or 7 years at the London Borough of Barnet in North London, and then moved to South London to spend a couple of years at Royal Borough of Kingston, and then relocated to Norwich, made the step up to Chief Executive earlier this year, and it's been an interesting few months, but really rewarding.
Oh, that's great to hear, and obviously welcome to the region. And excellent, Richard, if you could tell us a bit about yourself now, if that'd be all right.
Okay, thanks. So as you say, Matt, I've just stood down as Chief Exec at Central Bedfordshire Council. I've been a Chief Executive, or had been a Chief Executive, for nearly 26 years, straddling 4 authorities. I've worked for 7 in total, but led 4 of them. I joined Central Bedfordshire about 6 months after it had been set up as a new unitary authority. And back, those early years were pretty hairy, trying to fuse together 3 very different organisations against a really challenging financial background, and to be frank, with some deep-seated performance issues. But hopefully I've left it in slightly better shape than when I first arrived, and I certainly leave behind a really cracking team.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's good to hear, and I'm certainly being very modest there. Absolutely. Well, I mean, the reason we're all here today is we thought, seeing as you're on your way out, Richard, we'd this is a good opportunity to do a little bit of reflection and hopefully learn some hard-earned wisdom from you before you have the chance to run away for good. So as Stephen has really has volunteered to ask a few questions of you, for which we're deeply appreciated. So without further ado, I'll pass it over and I'll leave you to it.
Thanks, Matt. So, Richard, it'd be interesting to get your reflections on the East of England. How would you describe the East of England to prospective chief executives and other senior officers? Because it's an interesting region, and it doesn't always get the level of coverage that other parts of the country get. I don't know whether it's the geography or where we are or whatever, but what if you could just describe your views on that?
Yes, I mean, I think there's an issue with kind of regions overall, in the sense of they're essentially largely artificial constructions, aren't they? There is an administrative convenience for those of us that are involved in governance in the broadest sense. And whilst there are some parts that have a very strong sense of identity, that isn't necessarily the case for the whole of the patch. It's different if you're in somewhere like the northeast, where I think there's a greater sense of cohesion there. And arguably we've got slightly different issues in different parts of the region. So the kind of issues that colleagues that are serving coastal areas in the region are very different from those that are essentially tied up with the London economy. So, the Hertfordshires, the Bedfordshires, Essex, what have you, very much tied up with the London economy. But I think it's an area that's actually, or a region that's actually coming into its own, not least because of the level of development pressure in some parts of it. And also, the kind of renewed interest in the whole sustainability agenda, I think, means that there are some significant opportunities for the East. over and above that, it's got some attributes which I think are really important. So as a place to live, by and large, the quality of life is very, very strong, which of course is something which I think is significant as an economic driver, as well as, a great place to bring up a family, if you like. So I think that's important. And I have to say, in my experience, and I've been in the East on 2 occasions, so I've just stood down, as I say, at Central Bedfordshire, but I have been in the East some time ago before. And having worked in different parts of the country, I think I can say this, that there's something that is really very strong about the relationships that exist between colleagues from different authorities across the patch. It's a really good rapport. Certainly I found in my time, that kind of network of chief exec and other colleagues really valuable and good humoured, actually, and those sorts of things are easy to overlook. So I think it's got a lot of attributes. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. I've spent 10 years in unitary authorities in London, and now in the Norwich City Council district, and getting used to those relationships with other parts of local government. And clearly we've got a mix in this part of the country, haven't we, of unitaries, counties, districts. But and even the politics will be quite different in some of those different councils. But I do find that we work together really well. There will always be tensions, but actually, particularly the last 10 months, dealing with COVID, I feel like we've all kind of pulled together and just kind of got on with it, and we've kind of put any issues, even when all kind of LGR was on the table a few months ago, we put all that aside, didn't we?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think my sense as well is people have valued kind of both comparing notes, learning from experiences, but the opportunity to just download periodically and just kind of share in the complexity and the challenge of what everybody's dealing with the COVID crisis. And I think my reflection would be that's not an entirely new experience. So if I think back to all the work that we were having to do in anticipation of Brexit, which may come to the fore again as we think about the end of the EU transition period. Again, there was that sort of sense of a kind of collegiate sort of approach, people sort of pooling ideas, but also I think valuing the opportunity to download it a little bit in terms of what they were contending with at any one time. And I think that's something that's really quite special, actually, and it isn't replicated in every other part of the country. And I think we should. I think it's really important to try and keep hold of that, actually.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think the sessions we have as chief executives, there's always a really good attendance to those, and I think that says a lot. We're diaries are crazy busy, aren't they? But we, as far as possible, I think we value those sessions to come together to share experiences, and work as a partnership. I was just going to ask, thinking about your time as our regional lead chief executive, some of the highlights and maybe some of the challenges of that.
I mean, I'd certainly say there are definitely more highlights than challenges. I mean, there's been no doubt about it. There have been some things in the background that we've all been very conscious of, and you've already referenced one of them, which is the whole kind of local government review debate, which it sometimes resurrects its head. I think people are realistic, and I think they're also very professional. I think what unites us is a sense of we want to do best by our public, and so I don't think that has been as problematic for us, unless I've been completely deluded, than it has in other parts of the country. I think we've managed to kind of find a way through that. We spent an awful lot of time on the Brexit stuff that felt to be all-consuming for a while, and it wasn't just around the kind of preparations that we were all having to make for the unknown. There was a huge effort involved, and our colleagues in ILGA supported us magnificently in this, around kind of feeding the government machinery that, despite the fact that there was, I think, a genuine intent by some of our Whitehall colleagues to sort of minimise the degree to which we were being bombarded from different quarters. The reality is that that did happen. And what we were trying to do, I think, was to try and provide a bit of a conduit for that, and to also kind of put back into the system those issues where there were unanswered questions that we needed some support with. But that was pretty all-consuming for a while. And then very, very quickly, the COVID issue hit. And you know, I think when you go into a period where you're going into the unknown, aren't you? None of us have any experience which is any way comparable to the degree of the challenge that COVID represents. That's when the value of those relationships was really really important. And so, you know, if I look back on, you know, we're still in the midst of the COVID issue, but, you know, if I look back a few months, I mean, we seem to be really, really struggling with, frankly, some of the basics. I mean, I think we can all recall the enormous difficulties we were having in terms of equipping not only our own staff, but staff in care homes, for example, with PPE. I mean, you know, I can remember one weekend in particular where one minute we were all expecting deliveries of PPE and the next minute it was off and then it was back on again, and then another occasion where we're all, you know, hanging on the news bulletins to find out whether a couple of supplies of PPE had come in from a, I don't know, shipment in Turkey or something like that. You know, so we went through some of those sorts of challenges. But I think, again, one of the testaments to the region and the way we work together goes back to the fact that unless things have changed very dramatically, very, very quickly, all of the authorities in the East have remained in membership of the East of England Local Government Association. And I think that says something about the value that people attach to that opportunity to sort of kind of compare notes and work through solutions together. And there is something which I was struck by, actually, if I do look back a little bit further, which is, you know, at the time when the sector was coming under enormous pressure associated with austerity, and perhaps a Secretary of State, a former Secretary of State who will remain nameless, but I'm sure we can all remember who they were, who was, you know, delighting in issuing us with proposals as to how we could save money, you know, council biscuits at meetings and all those sorts of nonsense things. And it kind of created an environment for a period where people were almost frightened to venture out of their offices, as it were. You know, there was so much scrutiny on how we were spending our time, and you know, that was coming under, as I say, so much challenge that it led to a situation for a while where people were very, very reluctant to venture further from the boundaries of their own authorities. And the irony of that was at a time when actually we never, you know, we needed to do exactly the opposite. We needed to reach out. We needed to import ideas from wherever we could get them in terms of trying to battle through the austerity challenge. And that's actually where I think the East, again, came into its own, because I think people, you know, when we were allowed to actually travel anywhere, colleagues felt more comfortable travelling to a venue within the East for some of those exchanges of ideas and, you know, importing innovation, rather than to go further afield or even to London, because there was such intense scrutiny. So that was a bit of a low point in terms of, you know, we were operating in an environment where there seemed to be little value placed by those in government around people having opportunities to share learning and experiment with new ways of working. But actually, the requirement for it was really, really great. And actually, we managed to find a sort of middle path in bridging those two divides, if you like. Through the mechanism of our regular contact through the East. So I think that was that would be something that I think stands in my memory. But yeah, been an interesting period.
And what's kind of kept you motivated and over the years, and what were you kind of what have been your inspirations as a leader? Because you know, me being a relatively new chief executive, just the complexity of the job is immense, isn't it? And but also the real sense of pride for your own organisation and the sector as a whole. You know, particularly in this year where we've all had to do things that we never thought we would have to do, and providing that support to some of the most vulnerable people. And continuing to do that, you know, the sector has really come into its own, and you know, on the back of 10 years of austerity, faced the biggest kind of cuts of any part of the public sector, and the fact that we've been able to respond so effectively. But I guess from your perspective, what's kept you motivated over the years, and your kind of where you get your inspiration from?
So probably a few things I draw on, really. I mean, so first of all, my own background, actually. I come from a very, I'm in a fortunate position now, but I come from a very humble background. So I know what it's like to be dependent on the public sector, and I've experienced the good and the bad associated with that. And it kind of grounds you. It gives you when you're in a situation where what the public sector does makes a real difference to your life experience, it kind of reminds you, it doesn't matter what position you reach, to kind of think about things through the lens of the lived experience of residents. And that's very strong in me. And it's a great motivator. It's a great motivator because, you know, let's not get too starry-eyed about it. Everybody needs to pay the mortgage and all the rent or what have you. But I do think, I know it's a little bit old-fashioned, but I do think there is something about the public sector ethos. And I do think the people that typically work in a local authority environment, yes, they need to pay the bills, but they actually choose to work in a local authority environment, and they make a conscious decision to do that. And I think the thing that unites our people across the board is that concern to try and make life better for our communities or individual families or individuals. I think that burns very strongly in a whole variety of ways. So I remember doing something back in central Bedfordshire. And one of the sources of inspiration I constantly drew on, both back in central Bedfordshire but in previous authorities, is actually listening to our own staff and them talking about what they're doing. And, you know, car parking wardens who talk about the importance of what they do in terms of actually keeping children going to school safe. So, you know, they're not just people who are going around sticking tickets on cars because they like annoying local people. Actually, you know, they're part of an approach which is designed to ensure that we don't have a situation where cars are parked all over the place, for example, and as a result of it, you've got kids running out on the roads, can't see the traffic coming, and you know, there's an accident and what have you. That's what I mean about the people that work for us. They do a particular job, but I think by and large they understand that it's part of something bigger. And I look back and reflect, and I think, as I say, there have been times when I don't think everybody in my organisation has been in love with the organisation because of, back in the austerity period especially, we had to do some things which were really hard on staff. But what was striking and what I found humbling and inspiring at the same time is that their attachment to their client group, you know, the people that they're working with to support, is really very, very strong. And, you know, in a whole host of guises, you could do, you know, that they recognise that the organisation had to do some difficult things. Some of that was unpalatable to them personally, but they were especially concerned if they felt that the client group or the customer base they were working with was in any way going to be disadvantaged. And that is, you know, that is really inspiring. So, yeah, and I suppose the other thing, Stephen, that you kind of referred to there is about complexity. And boy, we do live in a complex world. But in a way, I think that's hopefully some of the added value that people that do the jobs that you and I do can bring, in the sense of someone needs to try and find a path through that complexity. someone has to be able to deal with the ambiguity. Somebody has to make all the linkages between very fragmented systems to have the level of impact that we want on our communities. But fundamentally, I've, that experience in my youth of being very dependent on the public sector has stayed with me and influences the way I've looked at the world. And I've never lost hold of that. What we do makes a real difference to people's lives, and that should drive our approach.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's the inspiration I have, and you can really see it. And my personal kind of journey from central government, I loved my time in central government. It was brilliant, but local government for me is the place to be. I've been here 10 years now, and it is that sense of you are having a direct impact on communities, and in some cases individuals. And maybe just thinking about the future, as we talk, we're kind of 4 or 5 days away from a big spending review announcement from the Chancellor, where the government, the country is facing a kind of deficit position of 400 billion as a result of what's happened this year, and that's more than double. I was back in the Treasury when I was there in kind of 2010. Coalition government coming in after the financial crisis, 150 billion was the deficit, and in that obviously led to the biggest reduction in public spending for almost a generation. What would your message be to government, as the kind of looking forward, based on what you've known about how the government should work with local government going forward, with these, in the context of the challenges that we're all facing?
Well, I think COVID and the response to it has really brought to the fore that you can't design and deliver solutions exclusively from Whitehall. And that is in no way to be disparaging of those colleagues who've worked incredibly hard within Whitehall. And one of the facets of the role that I had in the East was that I kind of saw at first hand some of what colleagues were contending with and what they're trying to achieve in Whitehall. And there are some fantastic colleagues who I don't think we should underestimate how hard they've been working. But you can't design it all from the centre. And if we think about the various programs of delivery in response to COVID that have been rolled out as big national programs, they struggled, frankly. Contact tracing is a great example where actually what we're seeing is the difference that it makes when you use local people and you deploy local systems to reach out to people who need to be encouraged to self-isolate. You can't do that several steps removed. So I don't look at this through the lens of national is bad, local is good, and there's no sort of middle path in between. But I think what we're learning is it's the fusion of the two that's really, really important. So I think my message would be the best solutions are those that are co-designed. Obviously, government has a legitimate role in kind of creating an overall framework, but that has to be the customization of proposals to reflect huge variation in local circumstances. And actually, I think as well, what a crisis, but a lot of people talk about in crisis management, there's a lot of kind of issuing orders and just telling people what to do. And I'm not entirely convinced I buy into that, actually, because I think that for the most part, the most important thing those in authority can do is to actually be very, very clear about objectives. And then I think you have to create a situation where actually you unleash the creativity and the knowledge that people have of the local circumstances to go and deliver solutions that hit those objectives. You certainly can't design the totality of the solutions, as I say, several steps removed. So I do think that emphasis on co-design would be one that I would encourage government to embrace. And as a sector, boy, have we demonstrated enormous innovation, both in response to COVID, but also in response to, as you say, Stephen, the austerity circumstance. And why would you not draw on that if you're sitting in government?
Yeah, and hopefully, you know, that people in Whitehall can see that. You know, just the role that local government has played over the last year in particular. We have been there for our residents, our businesses, when they've needed them the most, and so hopefully that will influence, you know, the way kind of policy is devised going forward, as you say. I just, maybe to finish, what I guess, what would be your main kind of sources of pride, maybe a couple of things that you're most proud of in your time as being a chief executive in the East of England?
Gosh. That's an interesting question. maybe I need to be further away from it to be able to give you a really cogent answer to that. But I suppose I think the fact that we have all hung together is actually really quite special. It goes back to right where you started, doesn't it? You know, for all the kind of issues that are thrown at us at times, including those which have the potential to be divisive, like local government review and all the rest of it. Actually, we haven't let that get in the way, have we? We've stood together and we've battled through. And I do think there is a sense that people can, you know, we've built a network where people feel that they're able to draw on support from others, either as a group or, you know, there might be individual conversations that take place. I think I know this sounds a bit silly and a bit flippant, but I think we've managed to retain our humour throughout this, and I often think that's underestimated, actually. You know, particularly when you're dealing with something that's so intense, so highly pressurised, so serious, you need to balance that with something that's a little bit lighter. So I think that's important. In terms of something a bit more local, I suppose, in terms of central Bedfordshire, as I've come out of that role, well, I go back to what I was saying a little while ago. I mean, when I first joined, which was 6 months into the life of the organisation, I remember very well, you know, people very, very gracious, very welcoming, and then sort of day two, you know, the finance colleagues come up to me and say, "We don't mean to worry you, Richard, but actually, you know, the projected overspend this year exceeds the inherited reserves from the predecessor authorities," which is code for we're going bankrupt very quickly, and sort of out of that difficulty, managing to come through that, and I think hopefully leave something that I think, and I would say this, wouldn't I, that is a bit special in terms of some of the impacts that we've been able to have on local people. But none of this, I mean, none of this you do in isolation as an individual, do you? It's absolutely about the teams of people around you, and you know, I've been very, very lucky, both in the East but in other parts of the country that I've worked in, that I've had access to some brilliant people, yeah. And that makes such a difference. It really does.
Any discussion with the finance director that starts with "I don't mean to worry you, but" is the classic. I love those. I love those conversations. There's going to be more of those going forward, isn't there?
Well, the thing I'm amused about is that wasn't the message they gave to me before I agreed to go there.
It's funny, that, isn't it?
It was all the money's fine, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I wonder why they do that. That's been great talking to you today, Richard. And you know, I think, as I say, I've been not been in this part of the world for a long time, but as I say, just going back to where we started, I think the sense of togetherness and partnership is really palpable. So thank you. It's been really enlightening, and thanks for everything you've done for the region, and you know, wish you all the best for the future.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, then.
Thank you.
Cheers.